Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Daalmans, and I will be presenting your next session about manage your Apple investments with Microsoft Intune. Like I said, my name is Daalmans, and I'm a principal consultant in the Netherlands. I live in Breda, and I'm around in IT around plus 20 years. I wrote a couple of books in the past, and I'm an enterprise mobility MVP for 7 years now. But let's start with the session. This session is all about iOS. And to start with, I want to have a brief discussion about mobile device management versus modern management. Because why would we need device management if we can manage the data or the apps and secure the data in the apps instead of securing the complete device? In Europe, we have a lot of bring your own devices, and we basically don't want to bother the end users anymore. And the end users are also slowly demanding that in Europe. So let's talk about the iOS deployment scenarios, where we have the first scenario is iOS app managed. And that's basically what I call modern management, where we only focus on the apps and the data with app protection without device management. And on the right, we have iOS device management, where we focus on the left of that, we focus on bring your own devices, where the users need to enroll their own device, but we can push apps via volume purchase program or just standard apps from the stores. We can apply policies and we can calculate the device compliance. The corporate-owned devices are more supervised devices. And with the supervised device, we can completely lock down the device. We can manage everything of the device. Um, to be able to do that, we need to walk through a couple of steps, and we will discuss that briefly in this half an hour. But first, let's talk about iOS management through Intune MDM. And I want to start with a couple of use cases for MDM. To come back on the first slide is why do we need MDM? We, from one side, we maybe want to have more control. We want to have app deployment, very important. We have kiosk scenarios where we have an iPad in the shop and we only want to allow the employees to use only one app. We want to deploy VPN, email profiles, Wi-Fi profiles, or basically when it's a corporate owned device, then we want to manage it. We can deploy certificates, compliance, and much more. So Intune basically supports compliance check. We can calculate the device state based on settings we configure in Intune. So we can check if a device is encrypted. An iOS device is always encrypted, but when we talk Android, we can check that. Where we can check if a device is managed, if a PIN is configured, and a lot more things. But we can also configure settings. And for iOS, there are quite a few. We can configure device features. We can configure device restrictions, email, trusted profiles, trusted certificates, SCAP certificates, PKCS certificates, imported certificates, VPN profiles, Wi-Fi profiles, and custom policies which we are able to create with the Apple configurator on a Mac device. So we can do a lot of things in this space. When we work with policies, we want to take account that a device requests a policy refresh um, standard every 6 hours. And this is not the same across all platforms. So for Android and Windows, this is different. But for iOS and macOS X, OS X, um, standard every 6 hours. But after enrollment, it will contact the Intune service every 15 minutes for 6 hours. And then, of course, when you target the device or user for a wipe, a lock, a passcode reset, an app deployment, a profile deployment, or a policy deployment, the device will also initiate it to contact the service. But how does this work? How does Intune reach out to the device to do something? Basically, in the Apple world, we need to use the Apple Push Notification Service. This is a cloud service managed by Apple, owned by Apple. So the first thing we need to do is set up a connection between Microsoft Intune and the Apple Push Notification Service. This is done by setting up a connection via issuing an APNS certificate and import it to Intune. This is mandatory. And after this is done, we are able to reach out to the device via the Apple Push Notification Service. So we send from Intune a notification towards the Apple Push Notification Service, and that service, that cloud service, reaches out to all our Apple devices. This is the same for macOS 10 and iOS. And after that, the device will reach out to Intune and report back. When working with Apple and the Apple Push Notification Service, we need to issue a certificate like mentioned. And this certificate needs to be renewed every year. And on the right side, you see a screenshot of the place where you configure this. You need to set it up with a corporate Apple ID. And this is very important. Don't use a personal Apple ID. Because in this example, I used a personal ID. But if I leave my own company and after a year, the people still residing at the company need to renew the Apple push notification certificate, but they don't have access to your Apple ID. So they will contact you, and if you're kind enough, you can share your Apple ID with them. But if you are away and you don't like the company anymore, then the company has an issue because they need to renew the certificate with the existing Apple ID. And if they don't have access it, the certificate will expire and all iOS devices need to be re-enrolled. So this can be a big issue. So basically, don't use a personal Apple ID. Make sure you use a corporate-owned Apple ID, or at least an email address which is attached to it. And you get notified, like you get an email 30 days in advance from Apple. And then you get a second email 10 days in advance. But you can also see it in the tenant details. And if you are really screwed up, you can see it also that your certificate is expired for 182 days. This is a screenshot from Jeff Gilbert, a Microsoft PM, which didn't use his tenant that often, so I borrowed it from him. So how to get the device managed? We can do this in basically 2-3 different ways. First, look at the manual enrollment for a bring your own device type. This is done by the company portal app. It's a user-based enrollment. So after this is done, we are able to configure everything. We can do jailbreak detection. The device is registered to Azure AD for conditional access and compliance. Single sign-on, we can use that. But how are we enrolling the device? And unfortunately, Apple changed this recently with 12.2. They changed the enrollment experience for all MDMs. And please look up this tweet of mine and retweet it and like it, because it's the worst end user experience ever. So let's have a look. So this is my iOS device. I start the company portal. I need to log on to the service with my email address. So I will do that. This is all the same end user experience like we had before. I need to enter my password. And as an end user, I'm informed about what is going to change on my device. So what the company can see, what we don't do, and we need to download a management profile. So I clicked continue, and I'm redirected to the web service of Microsoft, where we want to download the profile. And this is the first step. In this message, we are informed to open the Settings app to continue. Where we used to get a prompt to install the profile, we need to go out of the company portal, go into the Settings app, go to Management Profile, and install the Management Profile ourselves. We hit install, hit install again. We need to trust it, and then the Management Profile with the certificates are installed. We need to return back to the company portal, where we click continue, and then the device is checked for compliance. So it's a lot of steps a user needs to take now. We need to go out of the company portal, go into the settings app, go back to the company portal. It is confusing, and I will see a lot of issues, end user issues with this. Another way, and basically this is, I think, what is Apple pushing towards, is that we use a device enrollment program or the Apple configure, which is a lot of manual work. But the device enrollment program is basically the Windows Autopilot of Apple. The other way around, because Apple had it first, but we can buy a device from an Apple authorized reseller. The information is put into the device enrollment program service, and it's automatically synchronized to our Intune tenant. When doing this, we can lock the device completely down. We can enable Supervise Mode, and it's marked as corporate owned. To be able to do this with the Apple configurator, if you don't have a device enrollment program, we need a Mac. And we need to start with preparing Microsoft Intune. So we need to create an enrollment profile in Intune, where we say, okay, this device is allowed to enroll with user affinity. Next, we need to retrieve the Apple configurator URL by exporting the profile. We need to store this somewhere where we can access it from the Mac device later on. Next, we need to import the serial numbers of all our iOS devices. If you use that, this is being synchronized automatically into the Intune service. After that, we need to prepare our Mac device. So we need to remove the activation lock of the iOS device, because the Apple macOS device and with the Apple configurator will activate the device on our behalf. Since it's corporate owned, we don't want to allow the users to lock the device themselves. So if somebody leaves the company, the device is locked to one Apple ID, and then it's useless for the company. So by doing this, the device can be reused after an employee leaves the company. We need to connect the iOS device to the Apple configurator, and we need to choose prepare. And then in the first option, we are allowed to enable supervised devices. We need to configure the URL we saved by exporting the management profile of the enrollment profile. We need to configure some organizational settings. We can pre-configure all the screens, all the out-of-the-box experience screens of the device by selecting them or just deselecting them, and we need to click prepare. After that, the device is being resetted and it will come back as supervised. So we need to take account a couple of things. Apple is moving more and more controls to supervise mode. We have seen this, the switch from iOS 11 to iOS 12 is that a lot of settings were moved from basically to be able to configure it in the bring your own scenario without supervised to only supervised. So you see that Apple is moving towards more and more supervised mode. It basically is if you have a normal enrollment for bring your own, then you have less control. If you have a supervised device via DEP or the Apple configurator, then you have more control. For app deployment, we can do a lot of things. We can deploy line of business apps, our own apps we develop, or apps that we where we hire a software company for to develop. Those apps can be wrapped for app protection, but they don't reside in the Apple Store. So we sideload those apps from via Intune to the iOS device. We can use store apps. We can pull them down directly from the stores. We can use built-in apps. We can use the volume purchase program where we acquire apps from Apple. We prepay apps on behalf of the company. And then when the user installs the app, it doesn't need an Apple ID. And it doesn't need to configure his own credit card. So if you have a lot of corporate owned apps that cost money, you definitely want to look at the volume purchase program of Apple. And we can, of course, deploy web clips. And web clips is basically an icon on the iOS device, which refers to a web URL. With app protection, we can protect the apps. Later on, we have a little bit more about that. With app configuration, we can pre-configure apps. For instance, Workday, we can pre-configure the right URL to be used by the Workday app, which is basically an HR app. And we can perform remote actions on the app to remove the corporate-owned data if it's app protected. If we assign the apps, we can assign it as required, and then the app is instantly installed after enrolling or after assigning it. An available app becomes available in the company portal, and available with or without enrollment is basically also available in the web version of the company portal and the normal version of the company portal. This allows you as an admin to create a space for users which don't want to be enrolled, but they want to have access to a list of apps that are often used by the company. So if we quickly look at the apps, if we go into Intune, and this is a really short demo. If we go to client apps, and we click add, we have different kind of options to select. We have the line of business apps where we can import the IPA files. We have the built-in apps, we have the web links, and we have the iOS app type. And what we can do here is search directly in the App Store. And by default, it's the United States, but if you have your localized App Store, you can do this. So if we want to, for instance, look for Outlook, we can just search for it, select it, and then you will see that all the information is pre-populated. And you're basically, by adding it, you're basically ready to deploy the app to the users, which is awesome. So if we have a look in the client apps, you see that I also have different kind of apps here. And this is the iOS Volume Purchase Program app. It's an app um, acquired from the VPP program, which is synchronized to the Intune service. And from there, I'm able to assign it. So let's, for the last 10 minutes or so, let's talk about modern management of iOS. Because what is modern management of iOS? And that's not an official name, if you ask me. But for me, modern management of iOS devices or mobile devices is just managing the apps and the data. And we used to call this mobile application management or MAM. And then we had mobile application management without enrollment or MAMWE. Then we came up with app without enrollment or app protection without enrollment. We have a lot of names and a lot of acronyms. But basically, in this case, we only want to manage the data and the apps. And in the past, I had a lot of discussions with companies who were looking at different vendors also, competitors of Intune, and they said, "Oh, Intune doesn't have that many apps. See for yourself. There are quite a few apps that are where we can manage the apps, and not only manage the apps via configuration, but also protect the data in the apps." And if you look really good, you see also apps from Citrix and AirWatch. And that means that a lot of other third-party vendors are also looking into what Intune is capable of. So for line of business apps, we can also wrap those apps, like discussed earlier. We can use it by make line of business apps useful for Intune by wrapping it, of course, by using the Intune app wrapper, or if we ask the software vendor or your software engineers to natively integrate the SD Surface development kit of Intune directly, this is also possible. So with app protection, this is all what it's about in the modern management, where we focus on the app, and almost all apps of Microsoft support multi-identity. And here you see the Outlook app highlighted, where we have corporate data living next to the personal data. So we have a corporate account and we have a personal Outlook account living next to each other in one app. But from corporate data, from the corporate app, we are not able to copy or transfer an attachment to the personal email. So we're able to prohibit things like that. We can encrypt the data at rest. We can configure a PIN or credentials before entering the corporate side of the app. We can selective wipe only the data of the corporate side of the app, which is ideal for bring your own. And of course, we can also use it with MDM. MDM and app protection are going hand in hand. But then you fall back on maybe the corporate owned apps. So how does this work? We use the broker apps. In this iOS, we use the Authenticator app to access of Azure AD to authenticate. We use Intune to pull down the policies to configure the app. And we have a long list of capabilities what we can use to protect the app. And to highlight a few, we can prevent safe as. We can restrict transferring data to other apps, where we, for instance, the share function for attachments, we can prohibit to only manage apps. Um, we can automatically wipe after a device is offline for an X number of days. We can automatically wipe data when a device becomes jailbroken, etc., etc. For app configuration, we can also do this from Intune. And it's getting easier and easier. Um, Recently, there's a feature released for at least the Outlook app and a lot more apps is by using the configuration designer. You can just fill in the information uh, as listed on the right side. We used to do this via an XML, and you have to find out all the right configuration items. Um, an app, however, needs to support the app config features. And if you go to appconfig.org, you have a complete list of apps that do support it. So make sure to look there if you want to pre-configure an app. To secure this all, we need conditional access because if we don't have enrollment, we don't control the device itself. So we want to make sure that the device used and that the right app is being used to access the service. So we have app-based conditional access in Azure AD. And with this, you see Microsoft Intune, Azure AD, and the Outlook Cloud Service in Azure. We have Office 365 above with Exchange Online. We have the device with Outlook installed. So the user authenticates um, in the Outlook app towards Azure AD. And the user is automatically redirected to the App Store to install the Authenticate app. This is done. The user is registered the device in Azure AD, so we know what kind of device it is. It's not being completely managed. And the Azure AD app is verifying the Outlook app, if it's the right uh, uh, app being used. And then we check if the app has the right approved client ID, because basically Microsoft is using unique IDs, um, which cannot be edited, and so it needs to be the right one. An issue of access token is issued, then we are accessing with that token the Outlook service. We get an Exchange Online access token for the user, and we have access towards to Exchange Online, where and the email is delivered. So new feature in conditional access is the ability to check for app protection policy. And let's quickly highlight it. You can find it here. And this allows us, next to the require approved client app, where we check for the unique ID, this allows us to also check if an app protection policy is available. Because normally, if you require an app, there's not the ability to check if the policy is there. So we could end up with a situation where we have apps without a policy. And with this option still in preview, we are able to also block access to devices and apps without a policy. And this can be caused due to a couple of issues, like targeting of the app protection policy, or if you don't have an Intune license, etc., etc. This is a big help. So to finish up, I want to share this with you. If you have IDs, go to user voice and share your IDs. and I would like to thank you that you joined this session with me. Hope to see you next time.